Become a sustaining member of the Commonwealth Club for just $10 a month. Join today.
Welcome to a special edition of the Michelle Meow Show at the Commonwealth Club of California on this National Coming Out Day. I'm John Zipperer, the club's Vice President of Media and Editorial and Michelle's co-host for this program. Thank you all for joining us today, whether you're here in the room or you're watching online or listening to the podcast. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, the Commonwealth Club is a 118-year-old nonprofit, nonpartisan organization dedicated to holding civil conversations about important and sometimes just fun topics. If you would like to know our upcoming programs as well as seeing audio and video of our past events, go to commonwealthclub.org/MMS. We want to give a big thanks today to Sarah Monteford for providing the food for the delicious lunch before our program. And we've also got a microphone set up there in the aisle. So later in the program, if you've got a question, we'll invite you to go up to the microphone and ask it to our guests today. Now, to get us started, it's my pleasure to introduce Michelle Meow. She's the producer and the host of The Michelle Meow Show, and of course, a member of the Commonwealth Club's Board of Governors. Good to see you again, Michelle.
Thanks so much, John, and it's great to see all of you who are joining us in person, and thanks to all of you who are joining us online. I'm getting used to it. I'm getting used to, saying that. Happy National Coming Out Day. I woke up counting my fingers. How many years have I been out? And I realized that this year is 20. It's going to be the 20th year of my coming out. And wow, I can't believe it. And many of us go through that, right? And many of us in the LGBTQ community do. You remember coming out for the very first time as it's personal. So today I'm very excited to have two filmmakers here with us who produced, created, animated Pixar's Out. And so they'll be talking about, the importance of representation in our community, in, animations, especially films, and also talking about the importance of coming out. But before we get into our conversation, I've compiled a short video for you, about 7 minutes, of coming out stories, because aside from being out for 20 years, I've also been collecting coming out stories for 16 years. And so, by no means are these 4 stories a representation of the thousands of coming out stories I've collected. However, if you'd like to check them out, you can head to commonwealthclub.org/MMS. Let's check out that video.
My coming out story is a little complicated because I grew up in the 1950s and 60s when there wasn't even a word for coming out. Gay wasn't a word. Queer, not even, except as a derogatory. And, we were homosexuals. But I knew when I was probably about 6 years old that the, quote, traditional marriage to a man was not for me. And when I started thinking that I might be a lesbian and getting very involved in the women's movement, I actually had a lesbian trial where my fellow activists sat around me and said, even before I had a girlfriend or had even held hands with a girl, Helen, tell us if you're a lesbian, because if you are, you're going to be kicked out of the community, Asian, Latino, African American community. And at that time, there wasn't any kind of language like questioning or transition. It was, and I had to think, well, am I a lesbian? And I didn't have a card, I didn't get the toaster oven. And so I said, no, I'm not. Mm-hmm. And the power of words for me was that I stepped into the closet and slammed the door. And it took me a little while longer before I could overcome that internalized fear that I had from my fellow community activists who at the time were incredibly homophobic.
Wow.
But the power of coming out and wanting to be a full human being and have the experience of love and acceptance. I mean, of course I came out. And but it was a little bit of a circuitous path for me, and I know that's true for a lot of LGBT queer people too.
When you think about something with 40 or 40s, San Francisco Pride is celebrating 45 years of Pride this year. Golden State Warriors, waited 40 years and then have now achieved their championship, being a championship team this year. And you were in the NBA for over 40 years before you came out. I almost feel like winning the championship and then being the celebrity grand marshal is like a second coming out.
Wow.
Does it feel that way at all?
It's been a journey, right? We're all on our own personal journeys, and the last 4 years has been a remarkable part of my life, but it's definitely a part of my life. The decisions I made 4 years ago to come out in the way that I did, obviously, I had decided I was signing up for something going forward and being part of the discussion. And I welcome that, and this is for me a real honor to be participating in this way, and I guess in some ways it will be a demonstration of how far professional sports has come in a very short period of time, not as far as our society has come, so I think we have a lot to celebrate.
One of my favorite episodes, of course, is the episode in which they brought your mom to be your sous chef.
Yeah.
But you ended up winning that challenge, and it was so heartfelt to see your mom so proud. You mentioned your family just a little bit during that episode. Do you mind telling us your coming out story? And
No, not at all. It was kind of interesting. I had come out to myself when I was around 20. And I don't think I told my family until a few years later because I was kind of scared of just being completely rejected by them. But I came out to my mom and my stepfather on Christmas Eve at midnight, and 8 in the morning the next day they were leaving for Hong Kong. And I was just I had to get it out of my system. And so I just went for it and broke down in tears. I was crying. It was really emotional. But ultimately, it just took some time for her to kind of adjust, and she asked a lot of questions, and I think that's all you really can do is just really communicate with each other. And now she's great. She's just very involved in my life and very much involved with the people that I'm dating, and so
involved with the people you're dating,
the person that I'm dating. Yeah. So I guess in general, she's taken it quite well.
That's awesome.
And it's really great to have that off my chest and to be who I am.
Wow. Okay. Well, I'll just start with that. Neither of us intended to come out, so to speak. It wasn't like we grew up in a context where being queer was normalized or was even really available as an expression, and moreover for women. So we moved to San Francisco. We lived with our Aunt Annie Pride, rest in power, and we shared a room. I think both of us had crushes on people, and we were talking about folks that we were meeting and just trying to normalize things. And I think that we both got to a place where the conversations needed to eclipse. And so, we were literally laying back to back. And I said, Melora, I think I need to tell you something. And I was like, I need to tell you something too. And she said, I'm bi. I said, you have to think in front. She's like, I think I'm bisexual. And then I said, well, I'm gay. and what happened after that was a moment of safety and normalcy. And for someone that you grow up with and you've known all your life, it's the scariest thing to say something when you think that they're not going to be that anymore. I didn't know how Melanie felt. We both grew up in the church. We didn't move out here to, finally break free and come out. Nothing. We didn't move here for that. We moved here to study film, and our plan was to move to LA. We were going to be the female version of the Hughes brothers. And so that was our trajectory. Meeting people, and there's something about San Francisco. There's something about the Bay Area. I don't know if it's in the air, the water, but it creates this space for innovation, not only in industries, but in yourself.
Let's give a round of applause for all our incredible speakers who shared their stories. Well, now let's get the show started. I'm so excited to introduce you all to Stephen Clay Hunter, animator for Pixar, and Max Sacher. Did I say it right?
You got it right on.
Yes. Who's a producer of Out. Welcome, both of you, to the program. Well, you know the drill. It's tradition here. We talked about it, and so you get the opportunity to share your coming out story. And Max, we ask everyone. Doesn't matter. So however it lands with you, share a coming out story. We'll start with Stephen.
You want me to go first?
Yeah.
Okay. My coming out story. Oh boy, you're coming right off the top. Okay. Oh boy, I started Pixar, and it was probably around '99, and I was like around 27 or something, and I had moved to the Bay Area from LA. I was working at Disney, and I came up and started working at Pixar, and I was dating a guy down in LA who's from the Bay Area. And he said, it was around Christmas, and he's like, why don't you come and spend Christmas with my family here? And I said, I can't, because what would I tell my parents? And so we broke up over that, and it was like really heartbreaking. And I ended up on the phone with my mom and at work, and she asked me, what's wrong? Because moms know. And I was like, oh. And I'm like, okay, I could tell you, but you have to go get Dad. And so she went, we hung up, got Dad. I went to a conference room at Pixar, and then I told him at work, and I was talking to my mom, and we were going on it for a bit, and then she was like, we love you no matter what. Like, it's, it's fine, and kind of thing. And I was like, okay, cool. Where's Dad? Because he hasn't said anything. And she goes, oh, he went for ice cream. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. And then like an hour later, he called me and was like, you're my son. We love you no matter what. Like, I just had to go get some ice cream processed. And ever since then, it's been fabulous. Like you said, like hearing them talk about it, it's like they're a part of your life now. It's like, I can't imagine anything. Like, I can't imagine what the fear was. I mean, I know what it was, but it's also like how funny. Like, even good people, they're not homophobic. They're just, you just don't know how to have the conversation, how to talk about that. So, yeah, it's interesting hearing other people. So,
thank you for sharing.
No.
Max.
Yeah, hearing all these stories, it's obviously something as an ally I probably can't connect with on a really, really real level. I was fortunate enough that I didn't face that challenge of having to kind of come out with my sexuality because it was expected. I'm a straight man, and my parents probably assumed that. But for me, coming out, that moment in my life, I think was probably just more of an emotional moment. I'm a bit of a crier. I'm just going to lay that out right now.
He is.
And
really
I'm a bit of a crier. Yeah. Steve's seen me cry.
Yeah.
And I've always been like that. But for the better half of my life, not better half, but for the first half of my life, it was kind of to myself. And there was one time when I was off at college and I was figuring out what I wanted to do. I didn't know who I wanted to be. I didn't know what I wanted to study. I had loved film. I was homesick. I was in New York. I was far away from my family, and my dad came out to visit me. And he had come out a couple times to come visit me and see how I was doing. And for the most part, it was just a very regular visit. We went out to dinner. These are the classes I'm taking. This is what's going on in the world of the sports. This is the stuff that we talked about. And I left his hotel, and I went down the hallway, and I hit the elevator to go downstairs. And for whatever reason, it compelled me to turn around, go back, open the door, and I started crying. And I asked my dad, like, "Hey, I hope you're proud of me." And it didn't come from anything in particular, but it was an emotional breaking point in our relationship where from that point on, we were able to cry in front of each other. And I hadn't done that before with him. So that was a big moment for me.
I love that you just come out as a crier on the Michelle Meow Show.
It's so amazing.
I'm a
I was
crier
almost
too.
there just now.
I know. You don't, God damn.
So yeah.
I love that. John?
Well, we're going to see Pixar's Out. So could each of you, start with Stephen again, set the table for us. What are we about to see? What do you hope our attitude is going into watching this?
My whole thing with getting this thing started, other than creating like a little gay Twilight Zone story, was really getting families talking, just showing a positive fairy tale-esque kind of story about how people need to talk, and that's what it's really all about. Like you and your dad. Yeah, so good. Sorry.
I'd love to hear the process. Like, how did it all start? And I know this sounds weird, but I think for a lot of us, if not most of us, who are tuning in, who are here, we didn't live through a time in which there are a ton of movies that had LGBTQIA+ characters, let alone, a Disney film or a Pixar film or an animated film.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's amazing even now, like watching films that have that content in it. I'm still gobsmacked when I see stuff. Like watching The Old Guard with Charlize Theron and having those two gay characters in it. And it's so romantic, and so in an action movie, in the middle of an action movie, there's this amazing scene. And you're like, oh God, I'm so hungry for that, to be represented, to see yourself. Just a love story, just two characters in love. It's like great. But like where this film came from is sort of I had watched Call Me by Your Name, and it has that scene at the end with the father. Spoiler alert: there's like a scene with the father and the son just having a conversation, and it was just so. It was just so wonderful to see a dad just talking to his son about love, between him and this guy that they had met that summer, and it was just really emotional. Like I'm just like. I watched it, and then I had to stop it and cry, and then I had to rewind it and watch it again and cry, and then I cried myself to sleep, got up the next morning, printed the script out, read that scene, cried again. I didn't realize how hungry I was. Then I went to my therapist and talked to him about it. And it's like, yes, we need more of that representation in stories, and positive representations too, right? So I think that's where the hunger for this came, because when they asked us, so this was part of the Spark Shorts program at Pixar, and it was like the way of pulling in people that are from different departments, not just story, but bringing them in and letting them tell a story. And so we got a lot of autonomy up front to come up with the content. And so when they came to me, what do you want to do? And I was like, I think I want to do this coming out story. And I went off and wrote it, and it was basically the same. There was a lot of story elements that changed, but the general gist of the dog swap and the mom and things. Oh, spoiler! But that was sort of all in there from the beginning, and it was just. And then Max and would just help me hone it. Like we would work on the story, work on the dialogue, all together, and just to make it as emotional as we could. So really, it comes from that. It comes from my love of Twilight Zone. Back in the day, weird little stories. So that's generally what it's about.
Yeah. I mean, it's the Spark Shorts program is unique in that, you're working at this big studio, right? That we've, 20 plus years of feature length films of grandeur and they're big and they're big budgets and the crews are huge. And when they introduced the Spark Shorts program, I think it was back in 2018, the first Spark Shorts film came out in 2019. And it is, like Steve said, you're looking for storytellers from a cross-section of the studio, right? Folks who are simulation TDs who might not otherwise get a chance to tell their stories. Animators, story artists, documentary directors. So you have this amazing cross-section of storytellers. But you're given kind of like a fraction of the amount of time, the fraction of the amount of people and budget that you might normally get. And so that's where, it's hard to, in your case, I mean, a coming out story, how do you whittle that down to, in our case, 8-9 minutes, right? Because that's a lifetime of a tale, and so it was a fun challenge, though. We hope you guys like it. It's fun, it's emotional, it's funky, it's cool.
Shall we? Yeah, sure. Yeah, let's do it. Shall we watch the short film Out? All right.
This is our first time watching it with an actual audience. This is very exciting.
We're taking bets on whether Max will cry. So.
Hey, Greg, look what I found.
Remember this? I remember you hated camping.
Think you might hang it someplace other than your sock drawer?
Once we're in the city, I'll hang it right out in the open. I promise.
And if your mom and dad decide to visit?
Ha! That'll never happen. Happy moving day!
Okay. Who cried? Who cried in our online audience? It's okay.
It was
Go ahead,
great to hear people laugh too.
Well, Max, back in, what was it, 79, Disney was getting threats from people when they dared to release a PG-rated movie, as opposed to just G-rated Herbie the Love Bug stuff. I know Pixar is a division of them, but I mean, what was it like? Was this just not questioned at all, or was this a milestone as well within the company?
I mean, internally, obviously, it was a milestone. I mean, for us, Disney is continuing to try and take steps forward, right, to tell stories from the cross-section of the human experience, which is, shared amongst everyone. But we never, from the beginning all the way to the end, never faced any kind of doubt or hesitation behind the story that Steve wanted to tell. And from the get-go, if there was any sense of that, we certainly didn't see it. And I think that just set us off on the right foot to know that, like, hey, you know what? Not only are our fellow filmmakers within Pixar behind us, but, everyone at the Disney company as well is behind us. So internally, there was never any, questioning. Again, at the end of the day, this is a family story. It's based on truth. And as long as our films, fall within that, then it doesn't matter what kind of story you tell. And we certainly felt that on our end.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Like, a lot of it comes down to, like, Pixar from the beginning has always been about, like, director-driven stories. Like, it's coming from the directors, and it's like coming from who they are. And I think it's I got the opportunity to tell a story, so I'm going to tell who I am. I think that the more we can encourage more diverse voices in film, then I think we're better off. And I think Pixar especially, but I think Disney is opening to that too.
What were some of the responses, whether from your family or your friends or your community, or fans, like strangers?
I have to mention, even before the film was released, we were working on it for what, a year, 8 months or something?
Yeah, we were a little bit more than halfway done when we kind of had our Pix Pride screening.
Right. So and that's the one where we finally got all the voice work cut in, and we had some animation and things like that. And we always do these screenings just to gauge how it's working. And we grabbed Pix Pride, which is our internal employee resource group for the LGBTQ+ community. And they're fantastic, and they really push hard to get representation in all our movies. And Max worked with them to get a screening together, and we watched it with them, and it was just like, you're just like, kind of thing. And then I came out of the theater, everybody walked out, I came out of the theater, and like, what was it, Patty Bonifilio?
Yeah.
It was amazing.
Yeah.
I'd look over, she's just like sobbing, and I was just like, oh, okay, I think it's resonating. Like, it actually, like, it was like the first time where we went, I think it's working, right?
Yeah. She was probably like me growing up, didn't show crying, and so we knew if we could make Patty cry, it's going to work.
Patty's awesome. She's in charge of facilities at Pixar, and I'm terrified to death of her. And she's the most amazing human being. Yeah. So, but when I saw her crying, I was like, oh my God, okay, something's working here. That was really exciting, doing that screening.
I got to say, you said this at the beginning, but like right now, so this film came out, May of last year, while we were all at home. And, it kind of hurt that, not hurt, but you make these films to be seen on a big screen, live with an audience. And, we never really got to experience that. So this is the first time in a very, very long time that we've actually been able to like share the same room and watch the film together. So that means a lot. Just hearing the laughs, right? Not everybody's on mute. Although you guys were being quiet, we appreciated that.
Yeah, it's definitely got me feeling emotional right now. Sorry.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Thank you.
obviously the obvious question is the sequel is going to be even bigger and more explosions.
Totally.
Yeah.
Sure, huge.
Bigger budget.
Talk a bit more about, I mean, you wrote and directed it. How much of that were you doing as part of the process involved with other people? And how much of that was, I've just, you alone sitting and writing and crafting the story? I mean,
Oh, it was never alone. Like, it was always people, folks that I absolutely admire and love. Kristen Lester and Mike Daly were two of the earliest ones and Dave Lawley, who were like, I wrote the script, but I hadn't boarded in years, like 20 years where I sat, and I was just nervous to even try. And then they took the script and went off for a weekend and came back with a pile of storyboards. And we put it up, and they're like, "Now pitch it to us." And I was like, "Oh!" First of all, I had to ride that wave of emotion that they would take this story that's so personal and put it on, and just draw out all these beautiful boards, and they're so good. And so then that's every step of the way. Like, everybody who helped out with it was just really supportive. And it's weird because I've been out since I was 27, right, in that conference room, and so everybody at work, everybody knows me. Everybody's supportive. It's great. But when suddenly you're telling this story, and they're like, everybody's like, "Here, let me help," and everybody's bringing something to it, adding to it, constantly adding to it. It's just really emotional. Like, it's really it's like being seen for the first time.
Yeah. And Alex, what does a producer do on a short film like this?
So I think I kind of saw myself as Steve's second set of eyes and ears on the floor, right? Like a gut check for him. I think first and foremost, when he first asked me if I wanted to kind of help him make this film, it was, I was kind of taken aback because I was like, this is something really, really personal to you. Thank you for offering me to share this kind of experience with you. And so I think I always saw my responsibility as upholding exactly what Steve wanted to say and surrounding him with people who also wanted to help do that as well. So you're responsible for, assembling the crew, gathering the right folks in the right disciplines, who kind of believe in what we're trying to make. You're also in charge of the budget and the schedule. So I unfortunately have to play bad cop sometimes and tell Steve, no, I'm sorry, you can't have that. Or just, you can't have it right now, but we'll get it for you later.
Where's my pony?
Yeah, you're working with, contracted musicians to work on the soundtrack and the score.
But also, creatively, too. He was keeping me honest through the whole thing, story-wise, making sure that the emotional beats we were trying to hit were really staying true and honest to the story we were trying to tell.
Yeah.
That's what I needed most in a partner like that.
I just have to think, sorry to keep,
okay.
I just have to think that and this is maybe a weird thing to say, but I come from a very musical family. I would think that moment where you then are seeing it with music for the first time, that would really be emotional. That kind of is like adding the special effects to a science fiction film.
Every step of the way, it's just adding to it, and you're like, oh my God.
Sound is real. I mean, sound is always an underrated and underappreciated element of everything we see visually, right? Because it's just another sense of ours that gets in tune with the story. Yeah. But to how it's all made, I mean, all of Pixar, I think this is what makes where we work so special. It is a truly collaborative environment in the sense that filmmakers, the folks in the writers in the director's chair, are also willing to share something, knowing that pieces of it will get ripped apart and kind of broken down to its core. And but in the best sense of that process, right? Those people are there to kind of pick apart what it is that you're trying to say. And that's a challenge. But then from that, you kind of pick and choose. I really liked that. Let me take a little piece of this. I really want to hang on to this.
Yeah.
And then kind of make it my own.
Yeah. I really wanted that Magnum PI poster, but I couldn't get it. So I had to settle for the calendar with the fireman and the kitty.
Fireman calendar
works pretty
not
good.
a bad option.
It sounds a whole lot like allyship. Your position, Max, I think for many of us as LGBTQIA+ folks, we need that support, and we kind of need, the people that go out there and also fight for us. But in your situation, it really truly sounds like you've also tried to hold on to the authenticity of, Steve's story. And so what was that like for you? And as an ally, what did you learn as far as the importance of, being genuine about the project?
Yeah, I think that last part that you mentioned was definitely the most important, and that's learning and listening. And it kind of started with Steve retelling his coming out story for the first time for me to hear. and taking from that and keeping from that what he wanted to put in this film, right? And protecting that, or helping to protect that, right? And so it also means when Steve's not in the room, being an advocate, right? I think a lot of allyship, a lot of takeaway sometimes can be, well, I'm here, I'm with folks. If I hear something, I'm going to say something while they're present. But I think one of the bigger components of that is also being loud and advocating when you're out there by yourself, and you're hearing or seeing something that maybe is not in line with the story.
So. Yeah, that was huge. That was really huge. It was just keeping me honest to what I was trying to say, and just reminding me at specific moments where it's like, you stay true to what you want to say. And I'm like, okay. Yeah. Yes.
I totally understood what you're trying to say. I mean, we could all swap with our pets at any given time. So, John?
Well, Stephen, earlier before that we saw that you were talking about kind of like older films and how, catching gay characters or a gay relationship was really something. And to kind of even go back further where it wasn't something that would be obvious. And, those of us of a certain age can kind of remember watching shows or reading books, and you're like, oh, I think that, and I think those two maybe, or I think there's something going on there, but it's not being said. And so it is a very different world to where there's no, like in the short, there's no question about whether or not he and Manuel are gay. They're gay. They're a gay couple. It's about them maneuvering in society and what they do with that.
Yeah, so the audience doesn't have to read into it.
Yeah.
They can just see. It was interesting. I was reading, there was one tweet I remember where it was, somebody was saying, somebody said that you never say gay in the short. You never say he's gay. And they were complaining about it. And then I was like, oh yeah, probably, okay. And then, but then somebody else said, but it made me, I'm bi, and it made me read that maybe he's bi. So I could see my own self represented, And I was like, oh, interesting. Like, again, this is not stuff I plan on. Right. I can't sit here and say, oh yeah, well, I planned that. It's just, that's what we do. And I think going back, you're just hungry to see yourself. And so we read into everything. We read into Gaston. We read into all that, and at some point I'm just get frustrated with that. I just let us tell stories. Yeah. Come on, there's so many of us, And I think the structure of this, the Twilight Zone-ness structure of it was my intent to say this is a coming out story. It's not the coming out story. It's just one of them. And you could imagine Megs and Gigi. We were going to have an ending where you saw the camera would come up after they leave, and you would see the town, and you just see rainbows going down to different spots, kind of thing. They were going to help other people, and you could imagine doing other stories in that structure, like Twilight Zones, right? Rod Serling would always begin and end the show, and it was always, I love listening to him talk. So I'm I could sit there and listen to Matthew Martin intro and close out every show. So good.
Just a reminder to our in-person audience, we've got the mic there, so if you've got a question for Steve or Max, feel free to step up to the mic and we'll get to you. I know there's a couple of you here who are filmmaker nerds, kind of people like myself, so feel free to do that. Question for you as far as response and kind of, where the program came from. Do you think that this will open the door for more, especially for trans GNC characters? Trans GNC meaning gender nonconforming.
Gender nonconforming. Yeah. I don't know where the future is going within Pixar. I know that they're still making stuff and still looking for those storytellers. That's what they want to keep doing. And I know at Disney they've got a program too going with live action shorts, and they brought in some gender nonconforming people to do work on that too. So it's I can see the hunger, it's there inside kind of thing. It's just finding those voices and then really lifting them up to find bigger stories, right? I think that's what we're all just really hungry for.
What do you think, Max? More budget for these stories?
Yeah, well, I think it does start with the stories, right? You want to remain authentic and true, and I think they're definitely out there outside of the walls of Pixar and inside the walls of Pixar, and I'm very hopeful for what's to come in that sense. And I think we're obviously super proud of this and happy, like Steve said. It's just it's not the coming out story. And I think we're hopeful for the day where, you know, there's as many films out there as possible, and maybe it's just not the headline, right? It just becomes part of, this is another film that's told, right? And it becomes part of our everyday lives.
Not to be Mr. Negative, but has there been any negative feedback from how dare you do this?
I mean, yes, there was
You have a filter
definitely-
for that. You just put a filter for that.
filter that. There, I mean, you knew it was coming, right? Like on social media and things like that. And I would get comments and stuff like that. But there was really early on, we just talked and we were like, just don't respond to it. Don't feed the fire. They're going to comment, they're going to troll, they're going to say whatever they want. Just get it out there so people can see themselves in the stories. That's the most important thing, right? That some kid out in the Midwest can see themselves and start a conversation, hopefully, with their families. That's what we set out to do. So all that other stuff, I just don't want to respond to it. I almost responded to one where he said, I'm not homophobic, but your film really didn't do it for me. And I said, well, that's okay. I mean, here's some other non-homophobic films, and I listed like Wizard of Oz and Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, and like all these other films. And I was going to send it, and then I deleted it. I just sent it because I'm like, I can't, even trying to be funny, you're still feeling it kind of thing. So I'd rather just focus on telling the story, getting it out into the world.
As more of these films are made, obviously the level of risk goes down.
Yeah.
You're no longer the first, you're not,
Well, it becomes less of a risk, right?
right.
Like,
The
because
risk goes down,
there's
and then
more
you
risk.
can kind of explore it in different ways,
Yeah.
including, turning the table and telling a negative story about something that could be very emotional to people. But we know this is not the only representation that is going to be there, whether it's Indian person, whether it's an Asian person, whether it's an LGBTQ person or whatever.
That it becomes not a risk anymore, right?
But I, even from the funding standpoint, I mean, it's not getting easier and easier to make films, but, we can go make a whole feature film right now with this thing in my pocket right now. Like, technology has taken so many advancements over the past, 20, 30 years when Mulan came out, where you don't necessarily need an entire studio budget to create something meaningful. And so, I don't know, I think we always tell even some of the responses that we got from the film about, like, hey, I'm a up and coming so-and-so, and I want to learn how to do this, and your story inspired me, how can I do it? And it's like, well, there are tools out there. There's free things that you can use to kind of help, get that creativity out of you and tell the story that you want. So, yes, it might be easier to make something low budget, but then to get it out there in the world is probably another step. So,
How do you become a storyteller? I think that there was something there that you said, Steve, like we need those storytellers. Like I think we all have these incredible stories we'd love to tell, and we write them down, but then how do we get it to somebody who wants to make it into something bigger than whatever you wrote it down in?
I talk to a lot of kids about that kind of stuff too on like Instagram and things like that, and it's just like, just keep drawing. Like I come at it from the animator point of view, where it's like, sit down, write their story, draw it, and then just put it out there. I mean, we have Instagram, we have these things where you could just put stuff out into the world, and then hopefully more people see it, and then spread it around. You can actually, like, I think that's a thrilling place for us to be right now. Like, get it out there, just get it out into the world. I think back to, like, I'm working on a project now on my own, and it's just like, I want to. You just got to write it for yourself. Like you have to just dig into yourself, find out what's truthful, what makes, where's that kernel of truth inside you, and get that out, and then see if it finds a home,
So let's rewind here way back to the beginning of each of your careers. So maybe starting with Max and Stephen, how did you get into film and how did you get into Pixar? Obviously, you told us a bit about your education, but
so I was born here in San Francisco, and I never thought I would leave, but I did. I went off and pursued film from a very young age. I was always into filmmaking. E.T. was the movie that probably really turned me on to, like, oh my gosh, not only is there a world out there, but there's a world of like movie making and storytelling that really can open up your mind. And so I was working for an underwater videography company in college as an editor. And so I kind of started behind the computer as an editor, editing endless hours of fish and octopi. And then I got a job as the desk production assistant on WALL-E. That was my first project ever at Pixar. Running around doing whatever people told me to do. You know, that's actually where I first met Steve. Steve was working as an animation supervisor on WALL-E, and we kind of first met. And that's when you first said, like, we got to get you in the animation department. So I went on to work on various feature films before eventually Steve and I kind of reunited.
Incredibles.
On Incredibles 2. And that's when you started kind of talking about the idea of working on Out, or coming up with a story for what eventually became Out.
How did your career get started?
Oh, geez. I went to school for hand-drawn animation back in the 80s into 91, and I, just drawing all the time. And then I kind of dropped out and just said I didn't like cartoons, and so I started doing painting and working at Red Lobster, and just being, I want to be an artist, and it was horrible. And so I ended up calling up a friend who was working at a studio in Toronto, and he brought me in to work on this show called The Magic Adventures of Mumphy the Elephant in Toronto, and that was really fun, doing television, hand-drawn television stuff, and then Jurassic Park came out, and it was just like, oh my God, like it just blew my mind. And I think by that time I was out in BC, Vancouver, British Columbia, and I heard they were hiring at Industrial Light and Magic over in San Rafael to work. They were doing Casper the Friendly Ghost. So I came down and asked for an interview, and they hired me, and I learned how to use a computer, but working on that movie, and it was really eye-opening there. And then it just snowballed from there. I went from ILM to Disney and then back to Pixar for Bug's Life. And I've been there ever since. So
that is so cool. You both are so cool. It's already been pretty much an hour, and we've had an incredible afternoon celebrating National Coming Out Day.
Yay.
Last and final question for you both. It's an important one, even for our allies, and that is leaving us with some words, some thoughts, some final thoughts. What you'd like people to know, and your fans, people who enjoyed Out, especially on National Coming Out Day, and supporting the LGBTQIA+ community and our youths. So we'll start with Max, and then we'll end with Steve.
Yeah, I think, again, putting yourself out there, meeting as many people as you can, being vulnerable, and just being ready to listen and open. I think that's what it is. I think we all, wherever we're from and wherever we grew up, we start off thinking we know so much, but in the grand scheme of things, we know very, very little. Even growing up here in San Francisco, and I was exposed to all walks of life, and my dad owned an ice cream shop right on Market and Castro, and so I think, I'm used to all of this, but really there's still so much to learn and to get behind and to advocate for, and so you're never really an expert in anything. So listen.
I feel like the experience of coming out, the moment up to that moment, when I think back to that, I think about how scared I was and how fearful, and like everything was the worst case, and how dark and myopic life can become. You can just lose it. Just like I can just see the blackness like coming in, and I think that you're going to feel that, but know that there's a bigger world out there. Like Max is saying, like there is a much bigger world out there, and it's waiting for you to tell your story.
That's awesome. Well, let's give a big round of applause for our amazing speakers today. Stephen Clay Hunter, Max Saklar, both from Out of Pixar. And so, John?
Thanks again for our guests, and thanks for all of you here in the room and everyone watching and listening online. You can find more upcoming programs and audio and video from all of our past stuff at commonwealthclub.org/MMS. So stay safe, stay healthy, take care of yourself and others. Have a good week.
And last thing, thanks again to Ceremony Ford for our amazing lunch today.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Wow, that was really fast. There was other questions.